Chicago. Friday night. A ballroom full of people who have never once been told they don't belong. Crystal chandeliers, 200 guests in black tie. The kind of room where money is so old it has forgotten what it cost. She walks in alone, navy blazer. Italian leather portfolio. A first-class ticket stub still in her pocket from this morning's flight. She is not rushing, she never rushes. She finds the bar, orders sparkling water, and looks at the room the way someone looks at a problem they have already begun solving. Across the room, a man makes a phone call he doesn't want anyone to see. She notices. Then a woman in ivory Chanel turns toward her. And something that has been building for a very long time, in boardrooms, in footnotes, in contracts signed and broken and signed again, arrives, finally, at a single moment. The ring catches the light. The scar on her cheekbone was almost invisible now. Almost. She touched it once before she sat down, just the tips of 2 fingers. Quick checking whether something was still there. Then she folded her hands on the table and looked at the room. Harvard Business School, room 210. 43 students arranged in a horseshoe around a single leather chair, and in that chair, Naomi Reed, 41 years old, founder and CEO of Apex Data Systems. The woman Forbes had called twice the most important figure in enterprise AI that most people had never heard of. Until 6 months ago, the moderator smiled, the practiced kind, warm without being personal. Miss Reed, we've read the case study. We've watched the footage. A pause. But I want to ask you something the case study doesn't cover. Naomi waited. What were you actually thinking in that room when it happened? She looked down at her hands. Left, right. The thin white line below her left eye, that foundation almost covered. Almost. She looked up. Which part of the room? She said. The students laughed. Nervous. The kind of laugh that happens when something sounds like a joke and isn't. Naomi didn't smile back. Because there were several moments, she said, and they all felt different. She picked up the glass of water in front of her. Set it back down without drinking. Let me start at the beginning. She grew up on the south side of Chicago. Not the version people imagine when they say South Side, not jazz and neighborhood pride and deep dish on a Friday night. The real version. The school where the gym ceiling leaked when it rained. The bus route her mother took at 5:30 in the morning to get to a job that paid enough. Barely enough. The kind of enough that required careful decisions every single week. Her father left when she was 9. No drama, no confrontation. He just stopped coming home, and one Tuesday her mother changed the locks, and that was that. No explanation given. None asked for. Some things you understand without being told. What her mother gave her instead was this: a kitchen table, a lamp that worked, library books that changed every 2 weeks, and the belief, stated plainly and repeated often, that Naomi's mind was the most valuable thing in any room she walked into. You will not always be welcome, her mother said once, standing at the stove, not looking at her, just stirring. But you will always be capable. Those are not the same thing. Don't confuse them. Naomi was 11 years old. She never forgot it. Northwestern on a full scholarship. Computer science. Then a master's in machine learning from the same school because she couldn't afford anywhere else and wouldn't take loans she didn't have to take. Her thesis advisor told her, in her second year, that she might want to consider a different focus area. A is a crowded field, he said. Carefully. You might find more opportunity in applied statistics, data management. Something more, he paused. Accessible. Naomi looked at him. Accessible to who? He didn't answer. She finished the thesis, top of her program. Then she went back to Chicago, moved into her childhood bedroom, and started building. Not a startup, not yet just code, just her laptop and her mother's kitchen table and that lamp. 3 years later, Apex Data Systems had its first Fortune 500 client. 5 years after that, they had 38% of them. By 41, she had been on the cover of Forbes twice. The second cover had a headline her assistant read aloud in the car and then went quiet for a moment before saying, "That's accurate, actually." The headline: "The woman CEOs are afraid to call." Her company, $3.8 billion, 212 employees. Offices in Chicago, Atlanta, and Boston. A legal team led by James Okafor, who had been with her since year 3 and possessed the rare quality of knowing when to speak and when to simply be in the room. She had a penthouse on Lakeshore Drive she slept in 4 nights a week. She had a mother who called every Sunday and still asked if she was eating enough. She had no photograph on her office wall that wasn't related to work. This is not a sad detail. It's just true. 3 days before the gala, James Okafor walked into her Atlanta office with a look she recognized. Not alarm. James didn't do alarm. Something quieter. Something that meant he had already thought through several scenarios, and none of them were good. He sat down, put a folder on her desk. "We have a problem," he said. She didn't open the folder immediately. "How reliable is the source?" "Reliable enough that I flew them here and sat across from them for 2 hours." She opened it. 3 printed emails, sender information, redacted carefully. But the content was clear. Someone with access to Ashford Global's internal systems had been in contact with an outside party. The language was vague in the way that people write when they want plausible deniability. But the intent was plain. The contract that Robert Ashford had signed with Apex Data Systems in Atlanta 48 hours earlier was being targeted. "Options," she said. "We invoke the notice clause now. Get ahead of it legally." James paused. "Or you go to Chicago, to the gala. You look at the room, you figure out who." She looked at the folder. "Robert invited me, as a courtesy. He didn't expect you to actually come." She closed the folder. "Book me on the first flight Friday morning." James nodded once. "I'll be monitoring remotely, if anything. James goes sideways, you call me, and James," he stopped. "I'll be fine," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has learned, over 8 years, exactly which arguments are worth making. "Yes," he said, "you usually are." She booked the flight herself, American Airlines, Atlanta O'Hare, seat 2A. She packed one backup blazer. Charcoal, just in case. She did not think about why she packed it. The night everything changed, Naomi was wearing the navy blazer. $2,400. Italian construction. Bought 2 years ago, worn 6 times, each time to a meeting where she needed to walk through a door and be taken seriously before she opened her mouth. It worked every time. Not because of what it cost, because of what it said about the person wearing it. That she had thought about every variable before entering the room, including what people decided in the first 4 seconds. Her portfolio was under her arm. Buttersoft leather, monogrammed. Inside contract, 27 pages. The most consequential document Apex Data Systems had ever produced. American Airlines landed at O'Hare at 6:40 p.m. She went straight to the car James had arranged. No stop at her apartment on Lakeshore Drive. No detour. Straight down the expressway to the Langham, Chicago, where the Ashford Foundation Gala had been running since 6 p.m. and had 2 hours of momentum behind it by the time she arrived. She checked her watch in the elevator. 8:15. Missing the cocktail hour was deliberate. She preferred rooms already in motion. Rooms where people had sorted themselves into conversations, where the performance of was finished and everyone had relaxed slightly into being themselves. That relaxation was where information lived, where you could see who was watching whom before anyone started walking. The check-in table near the entrance. A young woman with a tablet and the smile of someone trained seemed delighted by every arrival, regardless of timing. Name, Naomi Reed. I'm Robert Ashford's guest. It may be listed under Apex Data Systems. Scrolling, more scrolling. A small pause lasted long enough to be noticed. Then, yes, here we are. I'm so sorry about the wait. A badge printed, handed over with both hands. Naomi took the badge, put it in her portfolio. She never wore event badges. Not defiance. A small, consistent refusal to let the first thing people knew about her so be something someone else had decided to print. She moved into the ballroom. The light inside the Langham, Chicago on a Friday night in autumn flatters everything it touches. Warm enough to be inviting, calibrated carefully away from anything that shows things as they actually are. 200 guests. Black tie. The Ashford Foundation seal repeated across every surface. The programs, the napkins, the menu cards, the ice sculptures near the bar that nobody was monitoring and that had been quietly losing its shape since 7 p.m. The auction items were arranged along the far wall. Framed artwork, travel packages, a dinner with someone whose name would mean something to the people in this room. The kind of items that exist at charity galas to give people a way to spend money and feel the spending has a purpose beyond the evening. She found the bar. Not for a drink. She ordered sparkling water and held it and let her eyes move across the room the way she trained herself to look at things. Not quickly, which draws attention, but with the heightened steadiness of someone who simply happens to be standing still. Old money and new money occupying the same space. The difference was in how they wore it. The men whose tuxedos fit the way tuxedos only fit when a tailor met you a person versus the men whose tuxedos fit the way tuxedos fit when you've ordered correctly online and gotten lucky. The women in gowns chosen to be seen versus the women in gowns chosen because they happened to own them. She was looking for Colin Ashford, 28 years old. She'd read everything available before getting on the plane. Northwestern, same as her, different experience entirely. The version of Northwestern, where the diploma leads directly into a VP title at the family company, where ambition doesn't require the same sequence of proofs. He had given 3 public interviews in the past year, each one centered on his vision for Ashford Global, each one containing some version of the argument that the company needed new direction, new thinking, new leadership. He was not subtle. She found him near the far wall, talking to a man she placed within seconds. Arthur Renfield, a real estate developer whose name appeared in the Ashford Foundation's donor list at the $50,000 tier. A man with no connection to the AI contract, no connection to Apex, no reason to matter tonight. Colin was laughing at something Renfield had said. The relaxed laugh of someone performing ease for an audience that wasn't quite paying attention. He hadn't noticed her. Good. She turned back toward the bar, and Catherine Ashford walked over. Catherine Ashford was 58 years old and had been beautiful her entire life in a way that had become, over decades, less about the face and more about what the face was attached to. The way she moved through a room. The assumption, built into her posture, that rooms arranged themselves around her rather than the other way around. Ivory Chanel gown. Hair maintained at a precise shade of blonde that required monthly investment. Jewelry that announced itself without apology, rings, earrings, bracelets that caught the chandelier light when she moved. The diamond ring on her right hand was large, the declarative kind. She approached the bar carrying 2 empty champagne flutes. Set them on the surface without looking at who was standing beside them. Then she looked at Naomi, not at her face. At the general area Naomi occupied, the way you look at an object you want relocated. Excuse me. Pleasant in the way pleasantness becomes when it's maintained by effort. These need to go back, and table 7 is running low on the appetizers. Naomi looked at the glasses. Then at Catherine. I'm sorry, the glasses. A brief gesture. They need to be cleared. The pause between what was said and what it meant. I'm not with the catering staff, Naomi said. Catherine blinked. Once, then again. I beg your pardon? I'm a guest. My name is Naomi Reed. I'm here as Robert's guest. Something moved across Catherine's face, not embarrassment. Something that required more effort than embarrassment. The expression of someone who has made an assumption and decided, rather than retreating from it, that the assumption must be defended, because retreating would mean acknowledging what kind of assumption it had been. Catherine Ashford had not acknowledged things like that in 58 years. Robert's guest, she said, the pleasantness gone, replaced with something cooler. I'm sure there's been some confusion. There hasn't. Events like this have formal protocols. Invitations go through the foundation, a pause that's waited itself, not through personal arrangements. I have an invitation. Then you have a badge. I chose not to wear it. Catherine stopped, drew herself up. The posture of someone who has decided this conversation is beneath her but intends to finish it. I think you should go back to where you belong. The words landed in the air between them. And then Catherine's hand moved. Not dramatically. This is what people got wrong when they told the story afterward. It was small, a dismissive wave, the gesture of someone clearing space. Emphatic but not considered. The kind of motion that with different jewelry on a different evening would have been nothing at all. But the ring was there, and the motion was toward Naomi, and the edge of diamond caught her cheekbone. The champagne flute in Naomi's hand slipped, hit the bar's edge, shattered, crystal across the marble floor, liquid spreading, and a thin, bright lob of blood appearing on Naomi's face just below her left eye. 3 seconds of silence, so complete you could hear the ice sculpture melting. Then Brooke Ashford said, "Oh my God," from 6 feet away and reached for her phone. Brooke was 24. She had been watching this exchange from nearby, with the reflex of someone raised on social media, the reflex that fires before the thinking does. The reflex that says, "This is a moment." She opened Instagram Live, 8:32 p.m. "Guys," she said into the camera, and her voice carried the practiced uncertainty of someone who was not much uncertain at all. "I genuinely do not know what is happening right now, but I cannot look away." The viewer count started climbing, then climbing faster. Because the internet has a nose for these things. Naomi did not move. She stood at the bar and touched her fingertips to her cheekbone and looked at the blood and let herself think, without filtering it, about what had just happened and what it meant. First, James is going to be insufferable about this. He wouldn't say it out loud, too professional for that, but she would see it in his face. That expression that lasted exactly 45 seconds before he shifted into lawyer mode and buried it. Second, the contact was reckless, impulsive, not deliberate in any sense that mattered legally. Third, page 23, the morality clause. She could feel the weight of that specific page through the cover of the portfolio without opening it. Fourth, Colin Ashford. She looked across the room at him. He had moved away from her Renfield. He was standing alone now, near the edge of the crowd that had begun dome-forming, and he was watching what had just happened with an expression she had not anticipated. Not horror, not the helpless embarrassment of a son watching his mother make a catastrophic mistake. Recognition. The expression of a man watching something arrive on the schedule he had set for it. That was the moment she understood completely why she had come to Chicago. The instinct she'd told herself was professional caution had been something more precise all along. She had come because the part of her that knew how rooms worked had already sensed, from 3 emails in a folder, that whatever was moving inside Ashford Global would surface somewhere visible. She had come to be in the room when it did. She pressed a cocktail napkin to her cheek, folded it so the stain faced inward, set it on the bar, straightened her blazer, and turned around to face 200 people who were deciding, in real time, who she was. She had perhaps 15 minutes to answer that question herself. If she left, portfolio under her arm, blood on her cheek, navy blazer and Italian leather and first-class ticket, and $3 billion of company that nobody in the room had put together yet with the woman standing at the bar. The story would be written by everyone who stayed, without her. She had never once let anyone write her story without her. She thought about her mother at the stove. Not looking at her, stirring, offering the words to the room. You will not always be welcome, but you will always be capable. She picked up her portfolio. At the edge of her vision, Gerald Steele moved through the crowd toward the spot where Colin had been standing. Gerald was 48, Boston's tech firm. She had met him twice at industry conferences and registered both times that he was better informed than he appeared and patient about how he used it. A quality she respected because she understood it. He looked at Naomi. His face said he had known who she was since she walked in. Then he looked at Colin, and his expression changed in a way that was private, not for the room, for himself. Like a man checking a calculation he had been running for a while and finding the answer he'd expected. He took out his phone. Not to film, to call. 3 sentences, low and quick. Then he put the phone in his pocket and looked back at Naomi across the crowd. She met his eyes. He nodded, very slightly. She didn't know yet what he'd done. She would find out at 6:15 in the morning over coffee in the lobby when he told her he'd been sitting on something for 3 weeks and had decided that tonight was the right moment to act on it. For now she had a room to address. She walked away from the bar, not rushing, not performing urgency, moving the way she moved when she had decided where she was going and had no interest explaining the route. The security guard, Davis, she would learn, caught up at the edge of the forming crowd. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to ask you to. What's your name?" He blinked. "Davis, Mr. Davis." She stopped, looked at him directly, not unkindly. "In about 10 minutes, you're going to be glad you gave me a moment." He looked at her for a beat that contained a decision. Then he stepped back, and she kept walking. She found the center of the room, near the podium where the auction had been scheduled to begin 22 minutes ago. She set her portfolio on the nearest empty surface, opened it, and waited. Because she had learned something across 15 years of building something from nothing in rooms where she was always the only person who looked like her. Control doesn't always go to the person who speaks first. Sometimes it belongs to the still point that the room orbits around while it decides what to do. It took 4 minutes. Catherine crossed the floor with the energy of a woman who has decided a situation needs managing. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said. "Just below conversational. But this is my foundesquets, and I will have you removed." "You can try," Naomi said evenly. "I have security. Mr. Davis has given me a moment." She raised her voice just slightly. Across the room, Davis heard his name and made a decision. Stayed where he was. Catherine's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." "I've made very few of those," Naomi said. "I'm careful." On Brooke's phone, Brooke had followed the crowd, still streaming. The viewer count crossed 35,000. Colin stepped forward. He moved well. The practiced ease of someone trained since childhood to enter rooms and redirect their energy. He positioned himself between Naomi and his mother, not aggressively, with the body language of a mediator, the performance of reason. "Mrs. Reed, warm, measured. I think there's been a genuinely unfortunate misunderstanding, and on behalf of my family, is your name on the contract?" Naomi said. He blinked. "I'm sorry, the contract, 27 pages. Your father's signature on page 1. Is your name in it?" A pause too long by half a second. "I'm the vice president of..." "Yes or no?" "No." "Then this conversation," she said pleasantly, "isn't with you." She moved around him. He caught her arm, not roughly, but he caught it. Brooke tilted her camera toward his hand on Naomi's arm. Naomi looked at his hand, then at his face. Said nothing. He let go. He didn't step back. He dropped his voice. The posture of private conversation in a room where private conversation was no longer a real thing. "Ms. Reed, let me be direct. Please. The contract my father signed will face challenges. Ashford Global's bylaws include provisions requiring board approval for strategic above a certain threshold. Section 14B, Naomi said. Board approval required for agreements above $2 billion. Your father's contract with me is $1.4 billion. She looked at him steadily. Your attorneys drafted those bylaws. I read them on the plane. Silence. Something happened in Colin's face. Small. Controlled within 2 seconds. But real. He had underestimated her, and it had surprised him, which told her precisely what she needed to know about how he had planned this evening. He said nothing more, stepped back. A man revisaging a plan in real time. Naomi turned back to the room. Catherine was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on her before. Not certainty, not indignation. Something underneath both of those. Something that certainty for 58 years had been doing the work of covering. She said quietly, almost to herself, "You people." 2 words. They didn't need volume. They had their own frequency. The kind that carries through rooms regardless of how softly it's said. That lens with lens of a succeed some repeated many times by many people who had never paused to examine the habit. The room heard them. Naomi felt them settle in her chest, not the shock of it. She had been observers of this for 41 years and had learned, through necessity first and then through choice, that you could carry them without letting them decide what came next. She thought about 12,000 people who would go to sleep tonight without knowing any of this was happening, who had built their lives around the assumption of a company that was stable. Mortgages, car payments, kids in school, the ordinary forward motion of a life built around a paycheck. She touched the contract in her portfolio, felt the weight of Robert Ashford's signature on one. Not yet. Let the room see who they're dealing with. "Mrs. Ashford," she said. Her voice was the same register it had been for the past 40 minutes, steady, unhurried. The voice of someone who decided, long before walking into this room, what she was here to do. "Do you know what your husband was doing in Atlanta on Wednesday?" The room went silent. Brooke's phone showed 47,000 viewers. Gerald Steele stood at the edge of the crowd with his hands in his pockets. Colin had stopped watching with satisfaction. He was watching now with something he hadn't brought into the room with him. Naomi held up the contract. The gold Ashford Global seal caught every light in the room at once. "Let me tell you," she said, "about a contract." Her voice didn't rise. It never needed to. She looked at Catherine Ashford. "Shall we begin?" She didn't open the contract immediately. This is what people got wrong when they retold this story. They assumed she walked to the center of that room and started reading. Page 1, line 1, like someone who had been waiting for an order didn't. She stood there, portfolio open, document in her hand, and she looked at Catherine Ashford. For a long moment, 5 seconds, maybe 10. 10 seconds doesn't sound like much until you're standing in front of 200 people with a phone camera pointed at your face, and someone is looking at you like that. Like the outcome of this conversation has already been settled, and she simply hasn't told you yet. Like she is the most patient person in the room, and patience, tonight, is the most dangerous quality available. Catherine blinked first. The auction was supposed to have started 9 minutes ago. The auctioneer, a thin man in a tuxedo cut for his exact frame, stood near the podium with the expression of someone who had been hired to perform one specific function and was watching that function become impossible. He checked his watch, looked at the crowd gathered near the bar area, checked his watch again. The bid cards on the auction table sat exactly where the staff had placed them 2 hours ago. Nobody was moving toward them because this was better. Everyone in that room knew it, including the ones performing concern. Naomi set the portfolio on the bar surface beside her, deliberately, like setting something down that you want to stay exactly where you put it. The bartender had stepped back long ago, moving to the far end with the diplomatic instinct of someone who understood this was operating well above his role. She took the fresh napkin he'd quietly left near her and pressed it once to her cheek, looked at the market left, folded it, stain inward, set it down, and she began, not with a contract, not yet, with a number. 23%, she said. Her voice carried without effort. The room had gone quiet enough that a normal speaking voice reached every corner of it. That's how much market share Ashford Global has lost in the last 18 months. Catherine's chin lifted. That is proprietary. It's in your public filings. Naomi didn't look at her. She was looking at the room. At the 200 people in their black tie who had come here to bid on art and go home feeling generous. Quarterly earnings report, page 41, footnote 7. Now she looked at Catherine. I read footnotes. A sound moved through the crowd. Not quite a laugh. The adjacent thing. Your logistics division, Naomi continued, her voice even and unhurried, runs on technology that was competitive in 2016. A fine year. For technology in 2016, she paused. It is not 2016. Collett shifted his weight across the room. She noticed. She filed it. Your largest distribution contract was terminated 8 weeks ago. The partner that terminated it cited insufficient technological infrastructure for real-time inventory integration. That contract was worth. How do you have access to another company's internal? $430 million annually. The way a doctor reads results. Just information, just what the numbers say, gone. Because the systems that could have prevented it weren't in place. Because modernizing those systems had been deferred year after year in favor of other priorities. She let that sit for a moment. The ice sculpture dripped onto the table beneath it. Audible in the quiet. 12,000 employees, Naomi said, across 11 states. People who go to work every morning for Ashford Global because they've made the decisions around the assumption that the company is stable. Mortgages signed, kids enrolled. The ordinary financial structure of a life built around a paycheck they believe will continue. She looked around the room slowly. 2 days ago in Atlanta, your husband signed a contract with my company, Apex Data Systems, a partnership to modernize Ashford Global's AI infrastructure. To rebuild the systems that have been losing ground for 6 years. To protect those jobs, she reached into the portfolio, brought out the document, held it up. The gold Ashford seal caught the chandelier light and the phone screens and the ambient glow of 51,000 people watching on a live stream simultaneously. The embossing glittered with the quality of something never designed to be theatrical and entirely theatrical anyway. $1.4 billion, she said. Over 36 months. The largest AI integration contract in Ashford Global's history, the room exhaled. From somewhere near the back, a voice said quietly, "Oh my God." Brooks' phone showed 51,000 viewers. The comments moved faster than anyone could read. But recognition was spreading through the crowd in the room the way it spreads. Temperature change. People pulling out phones and typing names. People leaning to each other with the urgent whispers of someone who has just understood something and needs another person to confirm it. She didn't look at the phones. She looked at Catherine. Catherine was very still. The kind of stillness that happens when a body has received information the brain hasn't finished processing. When the distance between what you assume to be true and what is actually true becomes visible all at once. like a crack appearing in something you thought was solid. Her hand, the right one with the ring, had moved to her side. She wasn't looking at the ring anymore. She started. Stopped. This is stopped again, which was striking, because Catherine Ashford was not a woman who stopped mid-sentence. She had spent 58 years being certain and expressing that certainty in complete, grammatically correct sentences, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been required to reconsider their position in real time. She had stopped, twice, in front of 200 people and 51,000 more. Colin moved. He was good at moving when things needed redirecting. She gave him credit for that. He had the instincts of someone who had grown up watching his father manage rooms and had learned the skill, if not the judgment. He stepped forward, positioned himself not between Naomi and Catherine this time. He'd tried that, but to the side slightly forward in the spacious position of someone offering to broker a resolution. Miss Reed, his voice had changed. The warmth from earlier was gone, replaced with something more direct, more adult. The voice of someone who has decided that performance isn't working and is shifting to a different approach. I think we've reached a point where continuing this conversation publicly isn't serving anyone's interests. Including yours. Including mine, she repeated. Your company has a contract with Ashford Global. That contract is valuable to both parties. Continuing to escalate this situation publicly creates reputational risk that, she said his name for the first time. Calmly. You just described to 51,000 people the existence of a contract that you told your mother's security team 30 minutes ago didn't exist. He went still. The man you called when this started, she said. When your mother's ring hit my cheek and Brooke turned on her camera and you took out your phone. She watched his face. I saw you make that call. I saw what your shoulders did when the other end picked up. A beat. So before you continue advising me about reputational risk, she said, you must consider what you've already given me to work with. The stillness in Colin's face lasted 3 seconds. Then he stepped back, not defeated, but recalculating with considerably more information than he'd had 60 seconds ago. He glanced at Brooke. Brooke was watching him with an expression he clearly hadn't expected from his sister. Not the easy solidarity of family. Something more complicated. Something that looked, from where Naomi was standing, like the beginning of a question Brooke had been avoiding for a long time. Colin looked away from her. He dropped his voice, moved slightly closer to Naomi. The posture of private conversation, performed in a room where private conversation was no longer available. Mrs. Reed, lower now, the performance entirely gone. Just a 28-year-old man speaking to another adult in a situation that had moved beyond his ability to manage. Whatever you think you know about the internal dynamics of this company, I know your father hired Apex because Ashford Global has been declining for 6 years, and every consultant he brought in told him the same thing. She kept her voice at the same conversational register, no lower, no higher. I know he signed a contract in Atlanta 2 days ago that he believes is the most important decision he's made in a decade. And I know that someone inside his company, she let that phrase stand alone for a moment, has been trying to find a way to prevent it from taking effect. Colin's jaw tightened. That's a serious allegation. It is, she agreed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, what do you want? She looked back at him with the expression of someone who has been asked this question before in boardrooms, in negotiations, in the offices of men who assumed that every position was ultimately a bargaining position. I want what was signed in Atlanta to be honored, she said. That's all I've ever wanted from this company. She turned back to the room, and she opened the contract. Page 1, she said. Her voice was the same register it had been for the past 20 minutes. Conversational, unhurried. The register of someone discussing this over a meal, rather than standing in a hotel ballroom with blood on her cheek and 53,000 people watching. Partnership agreement. Apex Data Systems and Ashford Global, signed February 14th, Atlanta, Georgia, by Robert Ashford, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Global. She turned the first page. Page 4. Scope of services. Apex Data Systems to provide comprehensive AI infrastructure modernization, including predictive logistics modeling, real-time inventory optimization, and algorithmic supply chain integration across all Ashford Global operations in 11 states. She turned again. Let the motion be deliberate. Let the room feel each page as its own moment. Page 8. Implementation timeline. Modernization to be completed in 3 phases over 36 months. Phase 1 begins within 60 days of signing. All critical logistics infrastructure to be upgraded before the end of month 12. She paused on this page, slightly longer than the others. This isn't a plan for someday. It starts in 60 days. She turned again. Page 12. Exclusivity clause. Ashford Global agrees to work solely with Apex Data Systems for all artificial intelligence infrastructure needs for the duration of this agreement. No competing partnerships. No alternative vendors. She looked up briefly. No parallel negotiations with outside parties during the contract term. She didn't look at Colin when she read that last phrase. She didn't need to. She heard him breathe differently. She turned pages steadily, letting each one land. Page 15. Performance benchmarks. Ashford Global's operational efficiency is projected to improve by a minimum of 19% within 18 months of implementation. These benchmarks are contractually guaranteed. Failure to achieve them triggers financial remedies in Apex's favor. She looked up at the room. I should note that in 11 years of business, we have never triggered a remedial clause, because the benchmarks are set from actual data, not optimism. She found the next page. Page 18. Diversity performance metrics. The AI infrastructure provided by Apex Data Systems includes embedded tools tracking hiring patterns, promotion rates, vendor selection, and compensation equity across all Ashford Global operations. These metrics are reported quarterly and published annually as part of Ashford Global's corporate responsibility disclosure. Catherine's expression shifted. This page she hadn't known about. Naomi let her register it, then moved on. Page 23, she said. The room changed. Not all at once, but the quality of attention in it shifted. The way it shifts when people understand the important part is arriving. She found the paragraph. Read it without looking up. Morality clause. Subsection A. Any conduct by principals, executives, or immediate family members of either party that results in material reputational harm to the partnership, as determined by either party's legal counsel, shall constitute grounds for immediate contract termination. Written notice required, effective upon delivery. She closed the contract, held it against her chest, looked at Catherine Ashford. Mrs. Ashford, you struck the CEO of your husband's most significant business partner, on camera, in front of 200 guests. She paused. Let the viewer count on Brooke's phone, 57,000 now, do its own work, and 57,000 people on the internet. She reached into her portfolio, withdrew a single sheet of paper, white, Apex Data Systems letterhead at the top. Her signature at the bottom, today's date. My legal counsel prepared this while I was standing at the bar. She set it on the surface beside her. Within reach. Not in front of Catherine specifically. Just there, available, visible to every camera in the room. James works quickly. It's one of his better qualities. She checked her watch. You have 6 seconds to decide what happens next, Mrs. Ashford. The ice sculpture dripped. The auctioneer had stopped checking his watch entirely. What happened in those 60 seconds? Catherine Ashford looked at the termination letter, then at Naomi, then at Colin, who had nothing useful to offer for her, and both of them had arrived at that understanding simultaneously. Then at the crowd pressing closer, at Brooke's phone with its view count climbing, at the chandelier above them, as if the ceiling might provide some kind of exit that the floor was not offering. Colin looked at his own phone, pocketed it, took it out, pocketed it again. Gerald Steele stood at the edge of the forming circle and watched Colin with the quiet, specific focus of a man who has made a decision and is waiting for the right moment to act on it. The auctioneer checked his watch once more, then put his arm down, stopped checking, and Brooke Ashford lowered her phone. Not to end the stream, just to lower it. To hold it at her side for a moment with the camera still running, pointed at the floor, broadcasting 60,000 people a view of marble tile and the edge of an expensive shoe. Like she needed her hands free, like she needed to think. Naomi watched her do it. Brooke was 24 years old and had been raised in this family and had grown up in these rooms and had spent her adult life managing the public presentation of a world she had never examined from the outside. And she was looking at Naomi Reed right now with an expression that Naomi recognized. Not from boardrooms, from something older than that. The expression of someone seeing a thing clearly for the first time and understanding that they cannot unsee it. The 60 seconds ended. Catherine Ashford looked at Naomi Reed and said, "I want to speak to my husband. He's not in Atlanta," Naomi said. Catherine blinked. "He's supposed to. He landed at O'Hare at 4 p.m. Naomi picked up her phone. "He's been in this building since 7:30. The blood left Catherine's face. Not dramatically, gradually. The way something loses color in the rain, steadily, thoroughly, until very little remains. "He's been in the building, yes." Naomi's thumb moved to Robert's contact. "Would you like me to call him? Or would you like to keep talking to me?" Catherine opened her mouth. Nothing useful came out. Naomi called Robert. She put it on speaker. Not because the call required it, because the room did. Because the story that was going to be told about this evening was being written in real time by 57,000 people. And she had decided, the moment she chose to stay instead of leave, that she would participate fully in that writing. It rang twice. Robert Ashford answered on the third ring. His voice was the voice of a man who had been in a hotel room on the 14th floor for 2 hours, listening to the sound of a building that contained his family making choices he had known they were capable of making and had chosen not to prevent. Naomi, just her name, the weight of everything behind it. "I'm in the ballroom," she said. "I thought you should know where we are." A pause that lasted long enough to contain several things. "I know," he said. "I've been." He stopped. "I owe you an apology." "You owe me more than that, but we'll start there." Another pause. "I'm coming down," he said. "I know," she said. She ended the call. The room was completely still, 59,000 viewers on a phone screen pointed at marble tile. Someone near the auction tables had put their own phone down, not to stop filming. Her hands had moved to cover her mouth. And then Colin Ashford spoke. He was close to her, closer than she'd realized he'd moved. His voice was quiet enough that the room couldn't hear it clearly. But she could. "I know you have something," he said. Not a question, not an accusation, just a statement, flat and direct, from someone who has run out of other approaches. "About the emails." She looked at him. "I know someone gave you something," he said. "That's the only reason you'd be here tonight. You came to see who it was." She held his gaze. "If that's true," he said, "then tell me what you want. Name it. We can settle this without Colin." She said his name quietly. "The way you say someone's name when you want them to hear the word, rather than the sentence around it. You just confirmed something I didn't actually have confirmation of yet." The silence that followed was the specific silence of someone understanding what they've just done. "I knew someone inside Ashford Global was trying to undermine the contract," she said. "I didn't know who, not for certain." She held his gaze for a moment longer. "Now I do." His face. For 2 full seconds, his face showed her everything it had been carefully not showing for the past hour. Then it closed again. She turned away from him, and she looked at Brooke. Brooke was 3 feet away. The phone was at her side. The stream was still running, 62,000 people watching a view of the ballroom floor. But Brooke was looking at Naomi with an expression that had nothing in it of the performance she'd been maintaining since 8:32 p.m. No camera angle, no audience awareness. Just a 24-year-old woman who had spent the last 90 minutes watching something she could not now unknow. She didn't speak immediately. Neither did Naomi. They stood in the middle of a room, still holding its collective breath, and they looked at each other, and the distance between them was 3 feet, and also considerably larger than that. "I didn't know who you were," Brooke said finally. Her voice was different, stripped of the register she used on camera. "When I started the stream, I thought." She looked at her phone, at the viewer count, at Naomi. "That's not the right thing to say, is it?" "No," Naomi said. "What I mean is," Brooke's jaw moved slightly, like she was chewing something. "It was wrong before I knew who you were. I'm saying that badly, but I mean it. It was wrong when I thought you were, when I assumed you were." She stopped again. "It was wrong." "Yes," Naomi said. "It was." Brooke looked at the phone in her hand, at the 62,000 people watching a view of the floor. "I want to say something on the stream," she said. "I wanted you to know first, before I do it." Naomi looked at her. She didn't tell her to, didn't tell her not to. She waited, because this was Brooke's choice to make, and Naomi had never been in the business of making other people's choices for them. Brooke raised the phone. 3,000 people watched the camera angle shift from marble floor to Brooke Ashford's face. She didn't adjust her hair, didn't find her angle, didn't do any of the things she would normally do when she went live. She just looked at the camera with her eyes slightly red and her chin steady. "I need to stop for a second," she said. Her voice was different on camera than it had been off it. Not more performed, less. Like going live had removed the last layer of the persona rather than adding one. "I started this stream tonight because I thought it was interesting. Because I thought it was." She paused. "I called it drama. I called it rich people problems. And I pointed my camera at a woman who had just been hit and I treated it like content." 63,010 people in the comment section. Her name is Naomi Reed. She runs a company called Apex Data Systems. She came to this gala tonight as my father's business partner. She was here as a guest. And my mother looked at her and decided, before she said a word, before she introduced herself, that she was someone who didn't belong in this room. Brooke's jaw tightened, and I pointed a camera at that, and I laughed and I told 60,000 people to watch. She swallowed. "That's on me. I have to sit with that." She lowered the phone, looked at Naomi. Then she turned the camera off. Not because she was done, because she had made, for the first time tonight, a choice that wasn't for an audience. Naomi watched her do it, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel in this room tonight. Not satisfaction, not the particular vindication of being right about something painful, something closer to sorrow. The specific kind of sorrow that comes from seeing clearly the cost of how things have been. What it has taken for this young woman to arrive, in her 20s, at a conversation she should have been having with herself for years. What it cost to get here, and who paid that cost in the meantime. She filed it away, not coldly, but completely, because there was still work to do in this room. She picked up the termination letter from the bar surface, held it, walked back to where Catherine Ashford was standing. Catherine had not moved during Brooke's camera moment. She had watched her daughter do it with the expression of a woman watching something she recognized as significant and could not yet fully interpret. She looked older than she had an hour ago, or maybe more visible. That was closer to it. The performance of Catherine Ashford, the certainty, the social architecture, the careful management of every room she entered, had been dismantled incrementally over the past 90 minutes. And what was underneath was a woman of 58 who had done something she could not undo and was beginning, just beginning, to understand what that meant. She looked at the termination letter in Naomi's hand. "Mrs. Ashford," Naomi said. Catherine looked at her. "Here is what happens now." She set the termination letter on the bar surface, face up, in reach of anyone, still real. "Tomorrow morning, your husband and I will hold a joint press conference. We will announce the partnership, as planned, on the schedule we agreed to in Atlanta." She paused. "And we will announce something that was not in the original press release." Catherine waited. "Ashford Global will establish a supplier diversity initiative, real investment in minority-owned businesses, not donations to a foundation, not a line item in a press release. Actual capital, actual partnerships, actual accountability." She let that land. Non-negotiable. A breath. The Ashford Foundation will fund bias training for every board member and every senior staff member within 90 days. External facilitators, not your HR department. Another breath. Also non-negotiable. Catherine's fingers moved slightly at her side, not reaching for anything. Just moving. "And you personally will issue a public statement, not a document your communications team writes and hands you to read. Not something that has been reviewed by 6 lawyers and a brand consultant." Naomi looked at her directly. "Something true, in your own words, about what happened tonight and what it came from." She picked up the termination letter, held it for a moment, then put it back in her portfolio. "If all of that happens," she said, "this letter stays where it is. The contract stays in effect. Your husband's company completes its transition. 12,000 people keep their jobs." She closed the portfolio. "And if it doesn't?" She left the sentence there. She didn't finish it. She didn't need to. The room knew. 64,000 people online knew. And Catherine Ashford, standing in her ivory gown with the ring on her hand and the certain knowledge of what the footage already showed, knew. Catherine looked at her and said quietly, with the rough, particular sounds of someone agreeing to something that costs them something real, "I'll do it." All of it? Naomi asked. All of it. The room exhaled. 200 people releasing something they'd been holding for the better part of an hour. Not applause. Something more involuntary than that. The sound of collective tension finding its release. Naomi nodded once. She picked up her portfolio, straightened her blazer, and turned toward the far side of the room, not toward the exit. Toward a quieter corner away from the phones and the crowd and the still-running cameras. She needed 30 seconds of not being observed. Just 30 seconds. She was almost there when she heard her name. Not called, just said. The way you say a name when you mean it to reach the person and not the room around them. She turned. Brooke Ashford. Standing in the middle of the ballroom with her phone at her side and her chin up and her eyes still slightly red. Thank you, Brooke said, for staying. Naomi looked at her, this young woman with the wrong instincts and the right ones fighting to surface, who had live-streamed a humiliation and turned off the camera when it mattered, who would spend a long time, Naomi suspected, working out exactly who she wanted to be. Don't thank me, Naomi said. Be different. She turned away, walked to the elevator, pressed 14, the doors closed. And in the quiet of the elevator, going up, she let out one long breath. The first one since 8:15 p.m. that she hadn't measured before releasing. The first one that was just for her. Upstairs on the 14th floor, Robert Ashford heard the elevator arrive. He stood up from the chair he'd been sitting in for 2 hours. He put on his jacket. He went to the door. Because the conversation he'd been avoiding since 7:30 p.m. was finally, irrevocably, here. The 14th floor was quiet, hotel quiet, a specific kind that exists nowhere else. Thick carpet absorbing every footstep, climate control maintaining a temperature nobody actually set, the distant sound of a city 40 stories below reduced to something almost gentle. Chicago at night through double-paned glass. All that noise turned into something you could almost mistake for peace. Naomi stepped off the elevator and stood still for a moment, which she never did. She was not a person who stood in corridors. She moved through spaces with purpose, or she didn't move through them at all. That had been the rule since she was 23, and learned that standing still in the wrong place, in the wrong way, carried a cost that nobody announced in advance. But right now, just 30 seconds. She pressed her back against the wall beside the elevator door and looked at the corridor stretching ahead of her and let herself be, very briefly, alone with the fact of what had just happened. Her cheek throbbed. Not sharply, the dull, persistent ache of something that had been ignored for 90 minutes while other things required attention and was now presenting its bill. The adrenaline had been metabolizing steadily since she chose to stay instead of leave. And what remained underneath it was the tiredness, not defeat. She knew the difference between those two things by now. Defeat felt like contraction. This was just tiredness. The ordinary physical cost of sustained precision. She was fine. She would be fine. She pushed off the wall and walked down the corridor to room 1407. She knocked twice. Robert Ashford opened the door before her knuckles finished the second knock, which told her he had been close to it, standing near it. Waiting with the specific posture of someone who has been in a room alone with a bad decision for 2 hours and is relieved, in the way that people are relieved by the arrival of a reckoning, that the waiting is over. He was 62 years old and looked it in a way he probably didn't on ordinary evenings. His tuxedo jacket was off. His shirt was untucked on one side. Not the cultivated casualness of a man who wants to appear relaxed, but the genuine disarray of a man who had sat down and stood up and sat down enough times that the careful presentation of the evening had come undone. The bourbon glass on the table behind him was empty. He hadn't poured another one. He looked at her face, at the cut, at the thin, dark line below her left eye, and the slight swelling around it and the faint rust stain at her collar that the napkin hadn't entirely addressed. He didn't say anything for a moment, then come in. She came in. The suite had a sitting area near the window. Chicago below, doing what Chicago does at night, burning steady and indifferent, going about its business regardless of what was happening on the 14th floor. The lake beyond the city, dark and immense. The kind of view that cost money and was worth it, and in this moment felt entirely beside the point. She sat on the edge of the sofa, not deep into it, an old habit. He sat across from her. No desk, no conference table, no lawyers or assistants or any buffer between what he needed to say and the person he needed to say it to. Just two people in a hotel suite at 9:55 p.m., one of whom had a cut on her face, and one of whom had contributed to it by choosing at the moment he could have chosen otherwise, to stay on the 14th floor and watch it happen on a phone. He said, I knew Catherine might do something. No preamble. Not exactly what happened, not that specifically, but something in that direction. She has strong opinions. She doesn't contain them. And I knew you were coming, and I knew she would be there. He stopped, looked at his hands, and I told myself it would be fine. He set his hands on his knees. That was cowardice. Not an oversight, not a miscalculation. I knew there was a real possibility, and I chose the version of the evening where I didn't have to do anything about it before it happened. Naomi looked at him. Why are you in this building? She said. You've been here since 7:30. I landed at 4, he said. Went to my office first. There were things I needed to look at before tonight. The board had flagged some irregularities in the Q3 vendor reports that I'd been putting off. I went through them at my desk for 2 hours, he paused, and then I came here instead of going home. Because I'd been telling myself for a week that tonight would be fine, and I wanted to be close enough that if it wasn't, I could. He stopped. You could what? Naomi said. I didn't know, he said. That was the problem. I came here because it felt like doing something. And then I sat on the 14th floor for 2 hours and watched it not be fine on my daughter's Instagram. He met her eyes. That's what cowardice looks like when it's trying to feel responsible. Naomi held his gaze. Who had built something real and let other things deteriorate around it, who had courage in conference rooms and could not locate the same courage in corridors, who had flown to Atlanta to sign a contract with her and could not walk one floor down when his wife drew blood. Not a villain, just a man. Doing what people do when protection has been the condition of their entire life, and the protection is suddenly absent. Going somewhere they can observe without being required to act, and telling themselves that proximity counts. She had seen it before, not always in people this honest about it. The board notified you at 2 a.m., she said. About Colin. He looked at her steadily. Yes. And you've been sitting with that for 4 hours. Yes. He paused. I went through the emails they sent me, all of them, the full chain. He was quiet for a moment. He's been doing this for 6 weeks. During the negotiation, while I was in Atlanta sitting across from you, I know. I don't know whether I'm more angry at him or at myself, he said. For building a family in which that seemed like a reasonable thing to try. Naomi looked at him. That's yours to work out, she said. Not tonight, and not with me. He nodded. The press conference is at 9 a.m., she said. You speak first. 2 minutes your words, not your communications team's words. What you actually think happened and why it was wrong. Understood. Catherine speaks after. I told her to find her own language. I'll hold her to that. All right. The Supplier Diversity Initiative and the bias training are confirmed. James will have the implementation framework to your legal team by 6 a.m. She paused. The implementation is audited by Apex. Quarterly, the numbers move or the contract provisions engage automatically. Agreed. All of it. He paused. And Naomi, I am sorry for what happened in that room, for my part in creating the conditions for it. She looked at him. Show me, she said. Not tonight. Over the next 3 years. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. All right, she stood, picked up her portfolio. Get some sleep, Robert, she said. You have a press conference in 9 hours, and you've been awake since Atlanta. She walked to the door, paused. Whatever happens with Colin, she said, without turning. That's yours. I'm not asking for anything from you about it. A pause behind her. I know, he said, quietly, the voice of a man who has, in the past 4 hours, been alone with a great deal. She left Section 3. Her room was on the 11th floor. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, set her portfolio on the desk with the careful movement of someone putting down something they have been carrying for a long time. Then she stood in the middle of the room and looked at it. King bed with cream linens, a window with Chicago in it, lower down than Robert's view, but the same city, the same indifferent brightness. The desk, the chair, the minibar she wouldn't touch. The bathroom door slightly ajar with the light off. A room like 10,000 other hotel rooms she had stood in over 15 years. She sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the blazer she'd set on the chair when she came in. Navy blue. 24 hours and 4 years of reliable service. The rust stain on the collar was dry now. Permanent, probably. That was done. Then she looked at it for a long moment. Then she laughed, once, short. The laugh that happens when something is not funny and is also, in some registers, too specific to name, exactly funny. She stopped laughing, looked at her hands, at the thin white line on her cheek visible in the mirror across the room, at the woman in the mirror who had walked into a hotel ballroom 4 hours ago, with a contract under her arm and a suspicion she hadn't been able to name yet, and had done what she'd come to do, and was now sitting on the edge of a hotel bed at 10 p.m. with a stained blazer and a throbbing cheekbone, and the particular tiredness of someone who has been entirely herself in a room that required it to cost something. She picked up her phone, called her mother. It rang twice. Her mother picked up on the second ring, which meant she had been awake, which meant she had seen something, which meant the story had traveled from a Chicago hotel ballroom to a kitchen on the south side. The same kitchen, the same table, a different lamp, because the original one had finally given out sepsin years ago, before Naomi had managed to get to her room. "Baby," her mother said, one word. Naomi closed her eyes. "Hey, Mom, I saw it's most of it." Before that, girl turned off the camera. Brooke, yes, a pause. She did right at the end. She did. Took her a while to get there. It did. The comfortable silence. The kind that only exists between two people who have spent years being quiet together and have given the silence its own grammar. Then, your cheek, it's fine. Small cut, it's already closed. Does it need? Mom, I'm asking, it's fine. Another silence. Shorter. Then quietly, did you cry? Naomi opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling. Not in the room, she said. But after? She touched the cut with 2 fingertips, the same reflex as in the Harvard classroom, checking whether it was still there. Not yet, she said. Still sitting with it. Her mother made a sound, not words, the sound a person makes when they recognize something precisely, when what they're hearing matches what they know from the inside. The sound of a woman who had spent 40 years holding things together in rooms full of people who underestimated her, and who knew, without needing it explained, what her daughter was carrying right now, and how long it would take to set it down. "Mama," Naomi said, "I'm here. I almost left." A pause, brief. "I know," her mother said when it first happened. When the ring, she stopped, started again. "For about 3 seconds I had my portfolio in my hand and my back to the room. I was going to walk out." "What stopped you?" Naomi thought about it. Not the answer she would give in a Harvard classroom or a board meeting or a press conference. The actual answer. There were 12,000 people, she said, who couldn't make that choice, who didn't have the leverage to walk out and let it get handled by lawyers on Monday, who were just there, working for a company that needed something I had. And if I left, the decision about whether they got it wasn't mine anymore. Her mother was quiet. "So I stayed," Naomi said. Her mother said, "That's my girl," and something in Naomi's chest loosened. Not broke open, not collapsed, just loosened. The specific release someone who has been holding something at controlled tension for a very long time and has finally put it down in the right place. She pressed her hand to her mouth for a moment, just a moment, then moved it away. "I'm okay," she said. "I know you are." A pause that contained a smile Naomi could hear without seeing. "Are you eating? They feed you at these things?" And there it was, the thing that worked every time, not wisdom, not comfort in the conventional sense, just her mother asking about food. Like she was 11 years old again, like she was sitting at the kitchen table with the library books and the lamp that worked. Naomi laughed again. "There were appetizers," she said. "I didn't have any." "Naomi, I was occupied." "You are always occupied when there's food available. I'll order room service. You will eat something real before you sleep." "Yes, ma'am. Good." A pause. "Call me tomorrow after. First thing, I mean it, Mom." "I know." First thing. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what I thought? When I was watching." "What?" "I thought that woman standing there so still. I didn't teach you to be that calm. A beat, warm. I taught you to be smarter than the room. The calm you figured out yourself." Naomi smiled. "The first real one of the night." "Good night, Mom." "Good night, baby. Room service?" "Room service," she confirmed. She ended the call, sat with the quiet of the room for a moment. Then she ordered food, because some things require strategy and precision and 15 years of building something from nothing. And some things require a hotel club sandwich at 10:15 p.m. Both necessary. Both matter. At 11:17 p.m., James sent 4 words. You need to see this. She was finishing the sandwich when it arrived. She opened the link. 12 emails. Colin Ashford and a competitor, the company that had bid on the Ashford Global AI contract the year before and lost. 6 weeks of contact during the negotiation. While Robert was in Atlanta signing papers with Naomi, she read them twice. It was all there, not overt, but clear enough to someone trained to read what careful language is trying to hide. Colin had been feeding details to a rival, building a relationship, positioning an alternative contract, his contract, not his father's, for the moment the Apex deal collapsed, which was what tonight was supposed to make happen. She thought about his shoulders relaxing when the phone connected. She called James. He answered immediately. Gerald Steele, he said before she could ask. She closed her eyes for a moment. Gerald, the 3 short sentences. Phone back in his pocket, the slight nod across the room. He sat on it for 3 weeks, James said. Watching to see if Colin would pull back, he didn't. So Gerald sent the full package to the Ashford Global Board at 10:43 tonight. 4-sentence cover note. Board met at 11 p.m. Voted at 11:26. Announcement at 11:31. She pulled up the alert on her phone. Ashford Global announces executive restructuring. Colin Ashford steps down as vice president, effective immediately. Board reaffirms partnership with Apex Data Systems. 44 minutes, she said. They were already awake, James said, already watching. They needed something concrete enough to act on. A pause. Robert was notified by the board chair at 2 a.m. standard protocol. She registered this. He would know before she saw him at 6:15. The implementation framework, she said. 6 a.m. Waiting for your review. She opened it. Changed monitoring to measurement. Changed best efforts to documented quarterly targets with specific percentages. Because imprecision is where accountability goes to disappear. Sent it back. That version. 6 a.m. Good night, Naomi. She set the phone on the nightstand. Lay in the dark with Chicago outside doing what Chicago does at night. 44 minutes. A board already awake and watching. People going to sleep right now with no idea their jobs were safer than they had been this morning. That's usually how it works. The decisions that matter most made in rooms where the fewest people are present. The difference is who's in those rooms. And whether they stayed. She slept 6 hours. She was in the lobby at 6:15 a.m., charcoal blazer. The backup. The one she'd packed without quite knowing why. It said something different than the Navy. I have been thinking about this longer than you realize. Which was accurate. Robert was already there. Corner of the seating area. Dark suit, pressed. The posture of a man who had stopped to sleep at some point before dawn and had eventually arrived at a chair and stayed there long enough for the coffee in front of him to go cold. He saw her cross the lobby. Neither of them spoke until she sat. A server appeared. She took the fresh coffee. Held it. I saw the board's announcement at 2, Robert said. I'd been through the full email chain by 2:30. He met her eyes. I did not know what Colin was doing during the negotiation, not until last night. I believe you, she said. He looked at her like he hadn't expected it. Does any of this change the partnership? She said. No hesitation. If anything, it clarifies it. If Colin had succeeded, if last night had worked the way he planned, we would have ended up with a contract built on bad faith. With a company whose relationship with Ashford Global started in maneuvering. He set down his cup. We need what Apex does. The people who work for this company need it. That hasn't changed because of what my son did or what my wife did. She nodded. I've been sitting here since 5, he said, not as an afterthought, as a confession, going through it. What I should have done differently, what? I should have said to Colin 6 months ago, when I first saw the interviews and understood what he was angling for. He looked at his hands. I kept thinking there was time to handle it quietly, that it would resolve itself if I gave it space. It rarely does, Naomi said. No, he said, it rarely does. She let that sit for a moment between them. Robert, she said, the people who work for your company are going to read this morning's announcement about Colin. They're going to read the press release about the partnership. They're going to piece together roughly what happened last night and what it means. She paused. What they need to see from you not from your communications team, not from a statement, is that the person running this company understands what stability actually requires. He looked at her. It requires honesty about what's broken, she said, before it becomes visible in ways you can't control. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, I understand that better today than I did yesterday. James arrived at 8:15. Tablet, framework, 4 hours of sleep and no visible complaints about it. He sat down, opened the screen, glanced at Naomi's cheek for exactly 2 seconds, and shifted his attention to the work. 8 years. She knew what those 2 seconds contained. Catherine arrived at 8:40. Dark dress, small earrings, no other jewelry. The bare right hand, Naomi noticed, said nothing. Catherine looked at the cut below Naomi's eye in the morning light. Something contracted briefly in her face. Not performed. Just the involuntary response of someone confronting physical evidence of what they did when the adrenaline is gone and the room is quiet, and there is nothing left to manage. I practiced what I was going to say, she said. 2 hours, different versions, none of them were right. They all sounded managed. Then don't use them, Naomi said. What do I say instead? The truth, whatever that actually is for you. The room will know the difference between something true and something that has been approved by 6 people. Catherine looked at her bare hand on the table. The truth is uncomfortable, she said. Yes, Naomi said. That's usually how you know it's the truth. Brooke arrived at 8:45 from outside. Walking energy. The kind that comes from being awake for hours with too much to process in a stationary position. She sat next to her mother without ceremony, phone at her side, and said she wasn't going to manage the family's social media anymore. That she'd been using a communications degree to make things look like something they weren't. That she needed to do something else. Catherine's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in the expression of a parent recognizing something their child that they played a part in creating. We can talk about it, she said quietly. Later, Brooke said, gently but finally. The press conference room was on the 2nd floor. 14 journalists, 2 cameras, clean and neutral, and deliberately not the ballroom. Naomi had been clear about that. She didn't set the sight of last night reused this morning as though it could simply be reset. Robert spoke without notes, 2 minutes and 12 seconds. No passive voice. His failure, he would carry it. Catherine stood at the podium and looked past the journalists at Naomi. She said what she'd said at the lobby table, with stops, with one moment where the preparation ran out and what remained was just true. She didn't use the word mistake. She said, this is what I believed, and I was wrong, and those are different things. Being wrong about something you were certain of is a reckoning. Not an error, a reckoning. One journalist near the front was writing without looking at her notepad. Just watching, recording from memory, because some things you need to see clearly to understand later. Naomi spoke last. The partnership, the AI infrastructure, the 36-month timeline, the supplier diversity fund, documented quarterly, publicly reported, consequences built in for non-compliance. The bias training, external facilitators, completion rates published, and the dignity index. 2 years in development, commercial, not philanthropic. A measurement system that made inclusive decisions operationally profitable and exclusionary ones operationally expensive. A journalist asked if it was already implemented at Ashford Global. Page 18, Naomi said. After, as the journalist filed out and James began managing the incoming calls, Gerald Steele found her near the door. I wanted to see how you handled the room, he said quietly, before I acted on what I had. She stopped. Turned to look at him. She said, 9 a.m. And Gerald, don't run that test again. I won't be the same version of it twice. One nod. The nod of a man who has heard something and put it in the right place. Brooke caught her at the elevator. The Northwestern program, she said. Dr. Holloway's, social impact technology. I know it, Naomi said. One of my people built it. She paused. It's not communications, not exactly technology either. Somewhere in the middle, the kind of work that doesn't have a clean name yet because it's newer than the vocabulary for it. Another pause. It's also genuinely hard. It asks you to be precise about things most people prefer to keep vague. It asks you to be accountable for the gap between what you say and what the numbers show. Brooke looked at her steadily. Is that a recommendation? It's a description, Naomi said. What you do with it is your decision. The elevator arrived. Naomi stepped in, turned around. Brooke standing in the lobby, phone at her side, not raised, not angled for anything. Just held. The way you hold something when you've forgotten it's there, because something more important has your attention. Chin up. The expression of someone at the beginning of something they can't fully see yet. Which is the only honest way to be at the beginning of something. Be different, Naomi said. The doors closed. She rode up to 11, walked to her room. Set the portfolio on the desk with the careful motion she'd used every time she'd set it down tonight, like something that mattered, because it did. Stood at the window, Chicago below, the lake beyond, flat and dark and immense. The morning fully arrived now, the city running at its ordinary pace, doing what cities do, indifferent the previous evening in the way that only time is indifferent. Not unkind, just continuous. She thought about the 44 minutes it had taken for act, once they had something concrete to act on. She thought of people going to work this morning with no idea that anything had happened. No idea that the contract protecting their jobs had been tested and had held. No idea that it had held because someone had chosen to stay in a room where she was not welcome and use every tool available to her precisely and without apology. That's how it works, usually. The decisions that protect the most people made in rooms where the fewest people are present. The difference is who's in those rooms and whether they stay. 6 months from now, she would sit in a leather chair in Harvard Business School, and a moderator would ask what she had been thinking in that room, and she would say, which part of the room? And 43 students would laugh the nervous laugh of people who don't yet understand the question. She would tell them about staying. About 3 seconds at the edge of a hotel ballroom where she chose to turn around instead of walk out. About the people who didn't have the option of making that choice for themselves. About what it cost to stay and why the cost was worth paying and how you know the difference costs that are worth it and the ones that aren't. A student in the front row would lean forward and ask, "Who taught you that?" And Naomi would look at the room, at 43 people who had read the case study and watched the footage and were trying to understand the distance between the story and the woman, and she would say, "My mother." At a kitchen table in Southside Chicago, when I was 11 years old, she did teach me to be calm in those rooms. That I figured out on my own. What she gave me was simpler than that. You will not always be welcome, but you will always be capable. And knowing the difference between those two things, not confusing one for the other, not letting the first undermine the second, that is where the work begins. And that is where it never ends. But that was 6 months from now. Right now, she was standing at a window on the 11th floor of the Langham Chicago with everything from its 14 Foss hours settling into its permanent place in the record of what she had done and chosen and refused to let anyone else decide for her. She picked up her portfolio. She had work to do.